Hi everyone, and welcome to the first lecture of the semester. In this lecture we're going to begin discussing what exactly drugs are and their importance in our society today. As you're probably aware, drug use in this country has been pretty constant in both a historical and modern sense. Humans have always looked for ways to cure illnesses and treat pain, whether that pain is physical or mental in nature. Because of this, there has been a huge market for the production of drugs, and there is a lot of money involved in both regulated and black markets. Throughout the semester, we're going to be focusing on many hot-button topics as we discuss legalization of certain drugs and a push to decriminalize others. We know that everyone uses drugs in this country in some capacity. You get sick, you go to the doctors, you get an antibiotic to cure your earache. You have a hard day at work and you go home and you have a drink. You get in a car accident and the doctors put you on morphine to help with pain management while you're in the hospital. There are different degrees and different uses for drug use. Even though we all use drugs, there are different avenues for drug use based on income. For example, if you're poor and you want to drink, you might have to discriminate less against the type of alcohol you're willing to drink. If you're rich, you can choose to drink only 40-year-old scotch. But it also extends to illegal drugs as well. For example, if you're a low-income cocaine user, you might have to purchase crack rather than powder cocaine. But the bottom line is that drug use and drug abuse does not discriminate. Rich, poor, young, old, black, white, male or female, it doesn't matter. At some point in time, we will all use drugs, but how we react and come to depend on them are different experiences for everyone. So I ask this, how many of you are drug users? When I ask this question, many people have the initial instinct to say, not me, no, I'm not. But in some way, we are all drug users, and many of us on a daily basis. For example, when I wake up in the morning, I take a couple different vitamins, and sometimes I need to take a Tylenol if I've slept wrong. Sometimes I need to take melatonin to fall asleep at night. Others might need blood pressure pills, pills for high cholesterol. Some might wake up and need to smoke pot or have a bump of coke to start their day. Drug use can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but in some ways we can all answer that we are drug users. Although we can all answer yes to the prior question regarding drug use, the level and frequency in which we use drugs are often dependent on a lot of different factors. In addition to the income levels that help determine which drugs we use, we also have other factors that aid in the reasons why we start using drugs and continue to use them. First, we have biological, genetic, or pharmacological factors. Substance abuse and addiction often involve biological and genetic factors. The pharmacology of drug use focuses on how the ingredients of a particular drug affect the body and the nervous system, and in turn, a person's experience with a particular drug. For instance, certain drugs give you a high faster than others. The way that you take the drug will have a different effect on your body. Do you have any allergic reactions to the drug? For example, I could never become addicted to Vicodin because it causes a strong allergic reaction within me. I learned that the hard way after I had my wisdom teeth taken out years ago. There are also cultural factors to consider. How do societal views, determined by custom and tradition, affect our initial approach to and the use of a drug? For Native Americans, smoking and drinking peyote is an action of cultural significance. If you travel to Europe, there is a more lax attitude towards drinking alcohol compared to here in the United States. The legal drinking age is lower than 21, and wine is commonly served with lunch and dinner daily. In terms of social factors, what are the specific reasons why a drug is taken? Meaning, am I trying to cure an illness? Am I self-medicating? Am I trying to escape from reality? Is there peer pressure? Am I dealing with my family upbringing? Am I part of a member in a drug-abusing subculture? Ask yourself these different questions. Are you drinking for fun or socially? Are you drinking because you're depressed? Are you drinking because your home life is rough and you're self-medicating? Are you taking the pills because the doctor prescribed them to you, or are you taking them because you're addicted to pain pills at this point? There are more socially acceptable reasons for drug use and the drugs that are being used. Drinking at a bar on a Friday night is more socially acceptable than drinking at a bar at 7 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. In terms of contextual factors, we are looking at how the physical surroundings, meaning music concerts, bars, nightclubs, or fraternity and sorority parties, are affecting the amount of drugs that we use. Ask yourself this: do you drink at concerts or at happy hour or with friends at a house party? Do you smoke pot only when someone brings it and only when someone buys it rather and brings it to a gathering? These environments also have an effect on how the drugs make you feel. Later in the semester, we'll talk about situational effects and how you might feel drunker at a party after 4 beers than you would at home drinking those same 4 beers. The music, the party atmosphere, and the social acceptability all have a role in how our bodies respond to a specific situation. So which one means the most? Which is the most impactful? That's going to depend, doesn't it? We'll spend the entire semester trying to answer this question and apply it to different types of drugs and situations. But before we can find the answer to that question, we need to spend more time trying to define and identify what drugs really are. So what do we mean by drugs? This means anything that modifies or distorts our bodies and our minds. What does distort or modify mean? In essence, it means to change it in some way. How does Lipitor change your body? It lowers your cholesterol. How does NyQuil change your body? It helps to calm your cough and helps you to sleep so that you can get better when you have a cold. NyQuil is very mild, but there are stronger cough medicines out there that you need a prescription for. There are cough medicines with codeine in them. Of course, this essentially does the same thing that NyQuil does, but at a much stronger level. And if you want to take this further, you can mix your codeine cough syrup with other things and come up with something like purple drink, Sizzurp, or lean. Basically, this is a clear beverage, such as Sprite or gin, that you add cough syrup with codeine to. If you're feeling fancy, you can maybe add a Jolly Rancher and let it dissolve. Purple drink has become quite famous through the rapper Lil Wayne, and he is most commonly accredited with this concoction, but he's probably not taking it for his cough, right? Drinking this will slow your body movements, it might cause hallucinations, it will cause drowsiness and sleepiness. On the flip side, taking this has caused Lil Wayne to seize quite a bit. That's the downside to taking creating the psychoactive high for him. So then what then are psychoactive drugs? A psychoactive drug is anything that alters your central nervous system and brain patterns, changing your perceptions of what is going on around you. If you remember from a handful of years back, a man down in Miami was taking bath salts, and these bath salts caused him to eat the face off of another man living in Miami. The Miami cannibal attack occurred in May 2012 when a man named Rudy Eugenes assaulted a man named Ronald Popo, a homeless man on the MacArthur Causeway in Miami, Florida. During the 18-minute encounter, Eugene, who was completely naked at the time, accused Popo of stealing his Bible. He then beat him unconscious, removed Popo's pants, and bit off most of Popo's face above the beard, including his left eye, in which he then became blind. The attack ended when Eugene was fatally shot by a Miami police officer. The autopsy report suggested that Eugene had bath salts in his system, and that it was an instrumental factor in causing him to eat off the other man's face. So psychoactive drugs often fall into the licit and illicit categories. Licit drugs are legal and for the most part somewhat socially acceptable. Every morning I partake in licit psychoactive drug use as I drink my 2 cups of coffee. Illicit drug use, these drugs are illegal, but depending on who you talk to, could also be socially acceptable. Pot, for instance, is becoming the poster child for social acceptability in terms of illicit drug use. But in some states, it's already considered to be licit drug use. Even though some drugs are more socially acceptable than others, we do see that more people die annually due to using licit drugs rather than illicit drugs, which is part of the argument for marijuana legalization, since it is so difficult to overdose on marijuana. You really have to try really hard to do it, and even then there are no documented cases of overdose from marijuana on its own. But the ones that we are worried about the most are what we call gateway drugs. The gateway drugs are those that we think will lead to harder drug use. If I drink alcohol or I smoke cigarettes, the concern is that I will then start using pot. Once I'm done using pot, it's not as effective as it used to be, then I'll start snorting coke or shooting up heroin. Something smaller and less dangerous leads the door open to bigger, more dangerous drugs. But how much validity is there to the gateway hypothesis? Do smaller types of drug use lead to bigger or harder types of drug use? The answer is no. The only thing that pot leads to is an increased appetite and maybe some bigger pants. But there is no credible scientific evidence that suggests that marijuana use leads to harder drug use. The biggest gateway drug that we need to be concerned about in this country are prescription pain pills. That's something that we're going to discuss later on in the semester when we discuss the opioid epidemic that is occurring in this country. Drug use can occur no matter what you're using. Clearly, our little guy on the screen here is using a illicit substance, but if he's mainlining coffee that much, then he's a little abusive of the world's best drink. What do we mean then by drug abuse? It means you're using the substance too much, too often, and in too great a dose to be considered normal or recommended. This is for recreational purposes, or it's because it's necessary because your body needs the drug to stay even. So you're misusing the drugs so much that you have now created a psychological and physical dependence on the drug. If at any point you start to go into withdrawal from the substance, then you are within the drug abuse or addiction range. For instance, you know that if you are a consistent coffee drinker, that there is a low level of dependence that can be created depending on how much you drink. You know how you feel on days where you cannot get a cup of coffee. For me, skipping a day of coffee results in a headache, and sometimes I get a little shaky. A quick cup of coffee and that feeling goes away. Can you imagine how much worse it would be when you can't get your regular dose of oxy or heroin? The withdrawal symptoms are much worse and without assistance can end up killing you depending on what you're withdrawing from. Drug researcher ERICH has developed 4 types of drug use. The first is considered legal instrumental use. This means taking prescribed drugs or over-the-counter drugs to relieve or treat mental or physical symptoms. You're taking the correct drug to treat the correct illness. You're taking enough medicine to treat your cough. You have a headache, you take 2 Tylenol, and you only take it when you need it, and you only take it for the thing that it's supposed to treat. The second category is legal recreational use. This means using illicit drugs like tobacco, alcohol, and caffeine to achieve a certain mental state. The drug itself is legal, but you don't really have a prescribed medical use for it. You're taking it because you enjoy the taste of alcohol or because you're trying to get drunk. You're drinking coffee because you're not coherent until you at least have your 2 cups every morning. And here you're just taking the drug because it's an enjoyable experience for you. You can still become addicted to these drugs or develop a dependency, but they're legal compared to other types of drugs that fall into the illegal recreational use categories. So third, we have illegal instrumental use. This means taking non-prescribed drugs to achieve a task or a goal. This is the flip side to what we were talking about before. You're no longer using NyQuil to calm your cough. You're using it as a sleep aid. This has happened so often in this country that the makers of NyQuil have created a separate medication called ZQuil, just so we would stop chugging NyQuil all the time. Your goal in taking the medication is different than the intended use of the drug. So Sudafed is a fantastic example. It is used to break up the congestion and sinus pressure that we have when we're sick. But what else does Sudafed help us do? It's an ingredient to help us cook methamphetamine. That's why you sometimes need to provide the pharmacy with your driver's license if you're purchasing the extra strength version of Sudafed, known as Sudafed D. Finally, we have the illegal recreational use, which means you're taking an illicit substance for fun or pleasure. I'm using pot because I like to get high. I'm using Molly, which is MDMA or ecstasy, because I want to feel the effects, or I want to feel the feelings of euphoria and inner peace that come along with the hallucinations. This is the category that we are most worried about because recreation can sometimes develop into a larger, more concerning issue. When you have all of these people taking drugs for a variety of different reasons, you're creating a high demand market that both companies and drug dealers have taken advantage of. We are spending so much money every year on the consumption of licit and illicit drugs. But what does this tell us? from this screen, we like to drink and we like to smoke and we like a pick-me-up in the mornings and in the afternoons and all of the time in between with our coffee and our tea. The numbers for cigarette use will largely keep transitioning from tobacco cigarettes to e-cigarettes and vape smokers in the years to come. Nothing costs us more than how much we spend on prescription drugs, however. We love prescription drugs and many of us use them. More than 70% of us use at least one prescription, and more than 50% of us use 2 or more every year. This means that the pharmaceutical industry is a huge business. A lot of the drugs that we take now didn't even exist 30 plus years ago. We have had a large boom of pills be released in the last 3 decades. Some of the most popular that we have introduced have even been created by accident. For example, Viagra. It was originally a heart medication, and then it had this little side effect in men that was rather beneficial in comparison to the heart treatment. But funny thing is, if you want to use Viagra and you have a heart condition, then you might need to take something else before you can use the Viagra. This was a miracle pill to men everywhere, but was the pill of the century for Pfizer. Not only do we drink a lot, many of us do it. The numbers on your screen reflect having used alcohol, tobacco, or illicit drugs at least once in your lifetime. The bottom line about illicit drug use might change significantly in the upcoming years. Once again, as marijuana makes the transition into legality, many individuals might choose to use it for the first time. With no potential for arrest in legalized states because of the personal use laws, many individuals might be willing to try something they were at one time unwilling to try at all. So when we break that down further, we can see that pot is the most common drug that we do use. This makes sense given that marijuana isn't as habit-forming as other drugs, and the side effects are mild in comparison to other street drugs. The potential for overdose is nearly non-existent, and marijuana does not give you the same hangover that alcohol does. The withdrawal process is also mild in comparison to other harsher drugs. And we have increased from 41.9 to 49% when this survey went out earlier again this year. More recent data reports that 1 in 5 young adults aged 18 to 25, that's 20.8%, were current users of marijuana. This means that 7.2 million young adults have used marijuana. Additionally, 7.2% of adults aged 26 and older were current users of marijuana, which represents about 15.2 million adults in the same age group. Psychotherapeutics are drugs that are meant to treat psychosis, depression, schizophrenia, manic depressive disorders, etc. Xanax, Valium, Ativan, Paxil, and other prescription drugs that are used to treat mental illnesses. However, we know that if we take a Xanax, there are also recreational properties to that drug that many are interested in experiencing. Hallucinogens are somewhat self-explanatory, but this category includes things like ecstasy and LSD. And of course, in your pain reliever category, you have your Oxycontin, oxycodone, roxicodone, and hydrocodone, just to name a few. So who's using? Well, when we talk about illicit drug use, we mostly are using more when we're young compared to when we get older. Once we hit our mid-20s, we really start to phase out of illicit drug use for the most part. Why do you think that is? Probably because there's more to lose if we're consistently using drugs. How many people are subjected to drug tests at work? Or who are tested by the criminal justice system because they're on probation parole? If we get arrested on drug charges, there would be more at stake to lose. They take our kids away, we might lose our homes, our cars, we break up our marriages. But what if we were talking about illicit drug use? What might this graph look like then? You would most likely see an inverse occur. The older we get, the more prescription medications we need to take to keep things working. In terms of race and ethnicity, we see that Asians are using illicit drugs far less frequently than other racial or ethnic groups, and that's a pretty consistent finding. Really, for all types of crime, Asian individuals just consistently commit less crime comparative to other minority groups. These rates of drug use are pretty consistent over the years too. They looked at drug use in 2002 and again in 2011. Hispanics were the only group to show a statistically significant difference in terms of reporting rates between the 2 years. It actually increased. Males consistently use drugs more often than females, especially in the large four drug categories. But the largest differential in use rates rests with marijuana. Men are reporting rates of use that are almost twice as high as females. The rates of drug use are smaller for cocaine, prescription drugs, and for hallucinogens. The more education you receive, the less likely you are to report drug use. What are some of the reasons for that? Again, there might be more to lose for some individuals. Higher levels of education are normally correlated with stronger levels of employment. Do you want to lose your job? Probably not. The one thing that is actually positively correlated with levels of education is binge drinking. Binge drinking is pretty popular among college students, especially on the weekends. Unemployed individuals report higher rates of drug use than those who are full-time employees. What are some of the reasons for that? Why might they be unemployed? Is it because of the drugs? Because of their criminal records? If I am unemployed, do I care as much about using? Some individuals who are unemployed might be temporarily unemployed and are in search of other jobs, so they still won't be using. But those individuals who are chronically unemployed might not care as much. What else do they have to lose? Geographic differences play a large role in the frequency of drug use as well. Of course, those in larger cities are going to report higher rates of drug use compared to those in other areas. We have more demand and more supply, so there are more dealers and more access to drugs in larger areas. In more rural areas, there is less demand and even less supply. You tend to have higher rates of meth use and marijuana use than for drugs like cocaine or heroin. Why do you think marijuana and meth are used more often? Well, if you're living in a rural area, it's a lot easier to grow marijuana on your own property, especially when you have a few acres to grow it on. You can spread the plants out and try and remain undetected. Then you have no need for a drug dealer. Meth is often called hillbilly heroin and is cooked by those in rural areas because of the strong smell that is associated with cooking it. When you traditionally cook meth, it emits a strong smell of ammonia, and we all know what that smells like. It's also quite volatile. When cooking it, there's a high risk of it exploding, so if you cook in the country, not only do you have the potential to avoid hurting others, but you might be able to hide the explosion better than you would if you were cooking in an apartment building, for instance. For those individuals who are in the criminal justice system, we see that roughly 1/3 of state and 1/4 of federal prisoners were under the influence when they committed the crime. This does not necessarily mean that they committed a drug offense, but that they were simply under the influence of something when they did commit their crime. They certainly could have been charged with the drug crime as well if there was any substance present, or at the very least they could be charged with public intoxication in addition to the crime that was thrown at them. Violations for conditional release are often quite frequent with drug offenders. This could mean that they're testing dirty. This means that it could be a whole new drug crime, or that there could be something else that violated their release conditions. Why do you think that federal prisoners violate more often? One reason might be due to the larger amount of drug crimes that are prosecuted by the federal government versus by the state. There is simply a higher number of those individuals being arrested for drug offense than there are at the state level. So we already said that we like to drink and that we like to use drugs. Some of us like to use them in the workplace. So maybe when I come to work drunk, or they find out that I have a fifth of something stashed away in my office drawer, but mostly these individuals are reporting drinking after hours or on weekends, and they just happen to be employed full-time. Or maybe I smoked a blunt and came to work. You really don't know how common this is, and a lot of people don't report it, especially at places where you're not drug tested. Some businesses in legalized states have stopped testing for marijuana use at work. The federal government still drug tests its employees, and if they work in a legalized state, even though marijuana is no longer illicit by drug standards, they could get fired. Once more states begin to go legalized, it's going to change the conversation about what is allowed in the workplace and what isn't, especially when your substance use is not causing any problems at work. Breaking down drug use based on the type of industry you work in, you see more illicit drug use being reported in blue-collar jobs like construction. It's not shocking that the arts and entertainment industry is within the top 3. What we do know about the longevity of these three types of industries is that they are often not careers. They're jobs, and at a high level of there is a high level of turnover present. Areas like construction often don't ask many questions of their workers. So these individuals with criminal records have an easier time finding employment in construction than they would in the other categories on your screen. These bottom three are more likely to get drug tested, so there is a less frequency of use. We know that certain employers will drug test you, either randomly or when there is cause for concern if you do something that is unusual or unsafe at work. Some people try to toe the edge of being able to use and still test clean for their urinalysis. It is a risk and a game of math, but typically the active drug can be cycled out of your system in a number of days. But this depends on quite a few different factors. Your height, your weight, how much you took, the quality of the drug that you used, and whether it was laced or mixed with something else. There are products that you can try and take to detox your body quicker than normal. They don't always work, however. You can also try and dilute your urine by drinking a lot of water, but that itself will show up in the drug test and they'll make you do it again, if they don't automatically fail you for purposely diluting. But your hair contains traces of a drug a lot longer that can be detected through your urine. That's why many people often thought that Britney Spears shaved her head when she did. She was going through a divorce and the custody hearings with her ex-husband, who allegedly accused her of drug use. So she shaved her head in an attempt to pass the drug test that was given to her. Of course, this is just speculation, but this is what many people thought was part of why she had shaved her head at the time. Drug testing is almost instantaneous anymore. There are different types of UA kits, but some of the more expensive ones can test for a variety of different items. On your screen, you see a slide of different drugs with different colored paper strips, and these are all part of different regular drug testing. So in your categories, you have things like barbiturates. So drugs like this can be Nembutal, Seconal, Clozapam, or drugs more commonly known as wallbangers, yellows, downers, reds, and blues. Amphetamines, you can have a test just for straight amphetamines versus methamphetamine. And with amphetamines, you have the potential to pick up meth, but there often is a separate test for it. Ecstasy is more commonly known as MDMA or Molly. Methadone is a pain reliever that helps you get past the bad part of opioid withdrawal. Normally you're prescribed this as you're coming off of heroin, and you can go to a methadone clinic to get past the worst part of it. You have, let's see, what's next? Phencyclidine is PCP or angel dust. Then you have tricyclic antidepressants. These are some of the really stronger antidepressants, and often you need to be weaned off of them because the withdrawal process is so strong. These are often compared to opioids in terms of their dependent structure. Let's see, what's next? Benzodiazepines, we often call these benzos. They are psychoactive drugs like Valium, Xanax, or Ativan. Cocaine, we all know. Methamphetamine, we've already talked a little bit about. Opiates, so the family of drugs that includes heroin, morphine, codeine, hydrocodone, things like that. Oxycodone is used so often in this country anymore that our drug tests test separately for it. Marijuana, we all know. Buprenorphine this is another narcotic. It's an anesthetic type drug that is used to help treat opioid dependence. And ketamine, our last one on the screen here. Ketamine is an anesthetic as well, and it was originally developed as a horse tranquilizer, and then it was later applied to humans. You can still use this in hospitals, but it is not often or very commonly prescribed by doctors because there are alternatives. While ketamine was still a legal drug, it was often used as a date rape drug, but please note that ketamine is not the same thing as K2, which is also commonly known as synthetic marijuana. So two different types of drugs there. One of the more recent arguments is that welfare recipients should be drug tested before they receive their benefits. You've heard this story before. If salaried workers are subjected to drug tests, so should those who receive state benefits. Some states have actually tried to implement drug testing programs for welfare recipients. The Florida program was dropped due to constitutionality issues related to probable cause for the testing. As there was no reason to suspect that there was widespread drug use among welfare recipients, the court stepped in and said no dice on this program. Florida actually was able to start testing their programs before the court shut it down, however. The findings were not very favorable for the state. In 2012, only 108 people tested positive for drug use out of the 4,000 plus people that were tested. This equates to roughly 3% of people testing positive for drug use. Again, these results were not what the state thought was going to happen in terms of this program. Arizona also tried this on their welfare recipients. Over a 4-year period, the state tested over 87,000 individuals. The drug testing project cost the state more than $43 million to test all of those people. Guess how many tested positive in that 4-year period? One. One person out of 87,000 tested positive. So the state spent more than $43 million to catch one person, and guess how much they saved in welfare benefits? $560. This is money well spent if you ask me. Today we opened up discussions regarding illicit and licit drug use, the growing industry surrounding drug creation and sales, and we talked about some of the reasons for use and abuse. Next time we're going to discuss some of the history surrounding drug regulation at the federal level and some of the issues that occur when drugs are not regulated by the state. And then we're going to work our way into discussing the issues that occur when drugs are regulated and are too tightly controlled by the state and pharmaceutical companies. Meet me back here next time when we pick up back with Chapter 3 of the textbook. Thanks for your time and attention, everyone, today, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. I'll see you later. Bye.